All right, let's dive into a mental model that's going to pretty much change how you see everything, from your daily routine to global economics. It's called systems thinking, and it all kicks off with one kind of weird question. So really think about it for a second. What is the difference between a pile of sand and a bicycle? I mean, they're both just a collection of parts, right? But one of them is obviously something much, much more.
And that something more is what separates a simple heap from a system. Look, you can take a grain of sand away from the pile, and guess what? It's still just a pile of sand. Nothing fundamental has changed. But if you take the chain off a bicycle, well, it's not a bicycle anymore, is it? It can't function as a bicycle. A system's real identity isn't in its parts, but in the connections and relationships between those parts.
This brings us to this incredible insight from the legendary systems thinker, Donella Meadows. She had this great way of explaining it with a slinky. You drop a slinky and it bounces and does its slinky thing. But what made it bounce? It wasn't just your hand letting go. It was its own internal spring-loaded structure. The system, to a huge extent, causes its own behavior. And that's a total game changer. It means if you want to understand why things happen, you got to look at the underlying structure, not just a single event.
So what's the engine driving a system's structure? Well, it all comes down to something called feedback loops. This, my friends, is where the magic really happens. Okay, a feedback loop is basically just a circle of influence. Let's make it simple. Think of your bank account as a stock of money. If that stock gets too low, that information, that feedback, gets back to you. And what do? You change your actions. You work more to increase the flow of money coming in. So the level of the stock influences the flow. That, in turn, changes the stock. It's a self-regulating or self-amplifying process.
And these loops really only come in two main flavors. You've got reinforcing loops. These are the accelerators. They amplify change, creating explosive growth or sometimes a total collapse. Think of a snowball rolling downhill, just getting bigger and faster. Then you have balancing loops. These are the stabilizers. They're always trying to hit a goal, to keep things steady, kind of like how a thermostat works, to keep your room at the perfect temperature. Basically, every system you can think of is a constant dance between these two types of loops.
And once you start looking for them, you see reinforcing loops everywhere. Take the peacock's tail. Bigger, more fabulous tails attract more mates, which leads to, you guessed it, even bigger tails in the next generation. It's a runaway cycle. Or what about emotional contagion? You smile, which makes someone else smile, which makes you feel even better. Boom, reinforcing loop. And the simple power of doubling. 1 Cheerio becomes 2, then 4, then 8. Before you know it, you're buried in Cheerios. That's a reinforcing loop in action.
But here's the catch. Real-world systems aren't just one neat little loop. No way. They are complex, messy webs of tons of different loops all interacting with each other at the same time. I mean, look at this map. This was actually created by students trying to figure out why their hallways were so noisy. You can see right away that even a seemingly simple problem is actually a tangled, super interconnected system.
So what happens when these invisible structures and our own perfectly logical actions collide? Well, let's take a look at a classic system trap. This is a recurring pattern that, more often than not, leads to total disaster.
Okay, imagine we're playing a simple game. You run a fishing company, and you share a big fishing area with a bunch of other companies. Your goal is simple: catch the most fish and make the most money. And there's only one major rule. Any fish left in the ocean at the end of the year will double. Simple enough, right?
So the logical thing to do, of course, is to catch as many fish as you possibly can to maximize your profit. And every other company, being just as rational as you are, does the exact same thing. So, what do you think happens? Total collapse. The entire fish population gets completely wiped out, and every single company goes bankrupt. Everyone acted rationally to achieve their individual goals, and it led to an absolute disaster for the entire group. This pattern has a name. It's called the tragedy of the commons. It's what happens when a group of individuals, all acting independently and rationally for their own benefit, end up depleting a shared resource, which leads to a collective catastrophe. And here's the key insight. The problem isn't bad people. It's a bad system.
And this is not just a game. This happens in the real world. Just look at the story of the reindeer on St. Matthew Island. A small population was introduced to this island that had tons of food and zero predators. Their numbers just exploded, a massive reinforcing loop. But in the process, they completely destroyed their own food source, and the population crashed from thousands down to just a handful. It is a perfect and absolutely tragic real-world example.
Okay, so that's the trap, and it can feel a little bit bleak. But here's the good news. Once you can actually see the system structure, you can also see how to change it for the better.
And this leads us to the most important question of all. If the problem is baked into the very structure of the game, not the players, then how in the world do you escape? You can't just tell people to try harder or be more considerate. It won't work.
The answer is you have to fix the structure. In The Tragedy of the Commons, there's a critical feedback loop that's missing. The fisherman doesn't immediately feel the cost of taking one too many fish. So the way out is to restore that link, to make the collective consequences felt by the individual.
This brings us to an incredibly powerful idea: leverage points. These are places inside a complex system where a small, well-placed nudge can produce huge, dramatic results. It's all about working smarter, not harder. So in our fishing game, just tweaking the numbers, like the fish regeneration rate, that's a very low leverage action. It doesn't really change anyone's behavior. But changing the rules with things like fishing quotas or adding new information flows by making the total fish population visible to everyone, those are medium leverage. But the highest leverage point of all, you change the entire goal of the system. You shift from maximize my catch to ensure a sustainable fishery for all. That changes everything.
And here's just a fantastic real-world example of this. When students at this school wanted to tackle bullying, they didn't just focus on punishing individual bullies. That's low leverage. They went for a high leverage point. They created a community pledge to literally break the system, changing the social rules and the goals of their entire community. They redesigned the system itself to produce a better outcome. How awesome is that?
Ultimately, thinking in systems isn't just another tool for your toolkit, it's a fundamental shift in perspective. It's like trading a magnifying glass for a wide-angle lens, so you can finally see the hidden connections that are actually governing our world.
Which leaves us with one final question. Seeing the world this way isn't just for understanding, it's for taking action. It gives you the power to find those little leverage points where a small push can make all the difference. So, now that you can see the systems all around you, where will you choose to intervene?